Gather round the fire, friends, and let me tell you a story about something that's been going on for a long, long time. The issue of gang violence. It's a tale that's equal parts fascinating and unsettling. According to the Department of Justice, there are more than 1 million active gang members in the U.S. alone. And in major cities, gang violence is responsible for roughly half of all homicides. Crazy, right? So let's dive in and find out how these street gangs actually work. Why do people join gangs? There are many possible reasons for someone to join a gang. For a lot of these kids, it comes down to simple poverty. They're growing up in rough, run-down neighborhoods where legit jobs and opportunities are hard to come by. So they turn to the gang life as a way to make some quick cash through criminal activities like theft and drug dealing. Then you've got the peer pressure angle. When you got gangs already entrenched in an area, it can be really hard for a young person to resist the pull, especially if all their friends are already involved. It's almost like a pack mentality. They don't want to be the odd one out, so they end up joining just to stay part of the group. And let's not forget boredom as a factor. I mean, if you're a teenager living in a community that's seriously lacking in things to do, no sports teams, no youth centers, not even a decent library, then the lure of the gang life, with all its excitement and respect, can be pretty tempting. But perhaps the most heartbreaking reason of all is what they call despair. That sense of hopelessness that can set in when you grow up seeing nothing but poverty, addiction, and gang violence all around you. When you feel like you'll never be able to escape that kind of environment, joining a gang can start to seem like the only real family you'll ever have. It gives them a sense of belonging that they've been missing elsewhere in their lives. And of course, drugs are often a major underlying factor in all this. The illegal drug trade is a huge source of income for street gangs, and addiction can drive people to join up in the first place. It's this vicious cycle that's been feeding the gang problem for decades now. Gang history. Gangs themselves aren't exactly a new phenomenon. In fact, the roots of the modern street gang can be traced all the way back to the 19th century, when places like New York City were hotbeds of gang activity. Back then, a lot of the groups were defined by their ethnic identities. You had Irish gangs, Italian gangs, Polish gangs, and so on, all battling for territory and power in the poor, crowded neighborhoods of the city. As the 20th century rolled around, gang activity started ramping up even more. Through the 1950s and 60s, most of the major gangs were still concentrated in the big cities, although you'd occasionally see smaller offshoots popping up in the surrounding suburbs. And by that point, the ethnic divides had started to fade, with the gangs becoming much more racially homogenous, mostly black or Hispanic. Then in the 1970s and 80s, things really took a turn for the worse. That's when the drug trade exploded and firearms became more readily available on the black market. Suddenly, being in a street gang wasn't just about turf wars and petty crimes. It was a way to make serious money, and a lot of it. And with all those guns floating around, the violence skyrocketed, peaking in the mid-1990s. Some of the most infamous gangs from that era were the Crips and the Bloods out in Los Angeles. The Crips started off in the late 60s as a response to the other local gangs, but they quickly grew into a massive, citywide operation with smaller sets all over the place. The Bloods then emerged as a rival gang, with the two of them engaging in this endless, vicious feud that resulted in countless deaths over the years. Gang life. Now, when it comes to the day-to-day reality of gang life, there are a few key things to understand. First, you've got your classic turf gangs. These are the groups that define themselves based on the specific neighborhood or area they control. These gangs are extremely territorial. Cross over into their turf uninvited, and you're looking at a serious beatdown, or even risk of getting shot. Then there are the ethnic gangs, where the identity and membership is all about race or nationality. These are the ones who are united by their shared hatred of minorities and anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of who's pure. And finally, you've got the prison gangs. These are the ones that start up behind bars and then extend their reach out into the streets. Compared to your average street gang, these guys are even more hardcore and brutal. Regardless of the specific type though, the basic structure and rituals of gang life tend to be pretty similar. You've got your clear hierarchy, with the more experienced, seasoned members getting the most respect and authority. And new recruits usually have to go through some kind of initiation. Everything from getting beat down by the whole group to committing a major crime like robbing a store or shooting a rival. The gangs also have all sorts of ways of identifying themselves and marking their territory. You've got the matching colors and clothing, the elaborate hand signs, the graffiti tags. It's this whole visual language that lets other gang members know who's who. And believe me, crossing out someone else's tag or flashing the wrong signs is a surefire way to start a fight. Of course, the main activity for these groups is crime. Everything from petty theft and vandalism all the way up to serious, violent offenses like assault and murder. And a lot of it is driven by this obsession with respect within the gang hierarchy. The more dangerous and ruthless you are, the more status and authority you gain. Stopping gangs. Now, when it comes to actually trying to stop all this gang violence, it's a real uphill battle. Police can crack down and arrest a bunch of gang members, but that just ends up driving the activity to a different neighborhood. And in some cases, it even backfires by uniting the gang members against the common threat and making them more cohesive and dangerous. The real key is tackling the underlying issues that lead people to join gangs in the first place. Things like poverty, lack of opportunity, and the general sense of hopelessness that can take hold in certain communities. Programs like the Department of Justice's Weed and Seed initiative try to address that by combining tough law enforcement with community-based initiatives to improve schools, create jobs, and generally give people a reason to stay out of gang life. Will it work? Well, that's just something we have to wait to see. Fingers crossed, folks.